Hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I am excited to finally get on the show Quentin Mackey. And I've been following him on LinkedIn. He's been following me. We've been interacting. I feel like I already know him. We're like fast friends. And I'm just so happy to finally get him here. I definitely think you're going to see why he was chosen as Leader with Heart. So welcome, Quentin.
Thank you, Heather. I am so happy we finally got it to sync up together. So yes, I am excited to be here as well.
So tell everybody right now, where are you in your leadership journey?
I would say where I'm at on my leadership journey, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from a podcast that I do listen to called Jamel Hill's Unbothered. I would say I am on my unbothered phase of my leadership journey. And what I mean by unbothered is not mean I'm unfiltered. In the sense is that unbothered in the sense is that during my leadership journey, you spend so much time trying to emulate other leaders and saying, okay, well, if I do this, and I'll get here, or do that, and I'll be looked at as this. And so I am on my unbothered phase in a sense of, hey, I am just leaning into, hey, what type of leader I want to be, or what type of leader I wish I had during the different phases of my career. And so I'm just being me from that aspect of leaning into what I feel is important, my principles, things I believe in, and just doing my thing from that aspect. And that I know that's not for everyone, but I feel that's where I'm at in my journey.
What field are you in? Are you I think you're in the tech space, right?
I am in the tech space. So I lead a team of excellent product managers here at Microsoft. And so I'm in product management. And so we are building products around employee experience. So I've been in this space, employee experience space and product management space for about 10, 15 years now, right? And so very interesting space, very interesting dynamic. I love how it's evolved over time. And so that's where we are. That's where I'm at right now.
I love that. I don't know if you saw, because I work for a tech company before, I have put out a product release, like a little journey map just this week. You should go check out my post, but I did that because I was like, you know what, as I think about what we offer with obviously the book that came out and workshops and the certification and the LinkedIn learning courses, like those are all product releases as it relates to the brand. Exactly. And so that's what we're doing. We're releasing products, and
yes.
I think it's important for people to see that. So good for you though. I love the work you do. And I just love, kind of what you represent. So we'll get more into that too, I think. So as we think about leading people, because I'm sure it sounds like it's been a journey and an evolution, what would people who have reported to you or report to you now, what would they say about your leadership style? What would they say?
I'd say my leadership style is more of a coach. Coaching and mentoring is my leadership style, right? And from that aspect. And I feel like, well, this coaching and mentoring, one thing that I always hear, and I've heard it from people who I have led, and just from other leaders who have talked to people who have worked with me, always says like, Quentin is a really good listener. So I think this is why you and I are kindred spirits in that space, right? And so I would say my style is coaching and mentoring, right? And from that aspect, I love sharing my experiences, not saying you have to do it my way, but I love sharing my experiences and helping, people as they're on their career journey, okay, hey, I want to share my experience, and not only my experience in a particular field or with a particular product, but just my experience in being a Black person in this industry, right? And not only just being a Black person in this industry, but being a Black person not from America in this industry, right? Which has been a very interesting journey at times, right, from that aspect. And so I spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring my team and helping them provide guidance and clarity on what they need to do and where they want to go.
I was going to ask you about that because you're from Bahamas, and that filter is different. If you weren't like born here as an African American that's here, it's different. Yeah. And so, what do you think are the nuances of either the experience that you bring and or how you see like America in the space of the DEIB work that we both talk about a lot?
Man, that is a very interesting topic, and I know I can get killed for this, but so from the Bahamas, right? Just to give some context to your listeners, the Bahamas is a majority Black place, right? The Black is the majority there, right? And so I grew up seeing people in positions of power, right? And usually because all people in power are Black, right? So it was not uncommon for me to not think like, okay, I couldn't be a doctor, or I couldn't be a lawyer, or I couldn't be the prime minister or a representative in government, right? Because that's all I saw growing up, right? All the CEOs and leaders of the big companies were Black people, right? From the out. So like, okay, this is, so to me, there was no limit from that, right? And so growing up and hearing the struggles of like African Americans, right? The perception we have, like, why are they always whining, right? From that aspect, right? And so not until I left and went away, no, bear in mind that I visited America a lot growing up, right? We went there for shopping, vacations, and so forth. But not until I spent an extended time in America, between North America, I mean, US and Canada, so in North America. So I went to school at University of Windsor, but I spent a lot of time going back and forth in Detroit. I had a lot of friends went to University of Michigan, Michigan State, etc. And not until I spent time there, I truly understood why, like, I started to really understand, like, whoa, this is different, right? And I will never forget my first class at University of Windsor. I'm sitting in this auditorium, 250 people, and the dean walks in and he says, I don't need to know your names. Half of you won't finish this program, and the world needs ditch diggers too. And he walks out. And I'm like, whoa. And so this was like an eye-opening experience for me from that aspect. And like, so now coming and living here and working here, it is a whole different dynamic. And like, I truly, like, I personally dug into the history of why it is the way it is, the history of African Americans here and so forth and everything, right? And so I've become more and more empathetic to their journey from that aspect, right? And, you know, some of the things that you talked about in your book, right? There's even levels of, you know, racism or segregation, even within our community, right? So I get looked at differently as I'm Black, but I'm not Black American, right? And so I even get looked at differently from that aspect. So the journey has been a very, you know, interesting journey in the sense of, I would be remiss to say, no, I think I've been very lucky and fortunate in my career here. I think I've been afforded some things that if I was Black American, I would not have gotten. It's because I'm not from here. So it's just been a very interesting dynamic from that aspect. Oh, you're from the Bahamas. You're different. Like, well, I'm still Black, right? And so it was, yeah, it just was a very interesting set of dynamics. And I've seen it where, hey, I've gotten treated different than Black Americans would have gotten treated.
Do you think, because here's what I've been saying this a lot to my kids lately, because I feel like as a mom, I'm a therapist, I'm a coach, I'm everything to the people even at home, right? And I've been saying a lot to them that like that your circumstances might be one thing, but how you perceive your circumstances then also like frames how you actually see them. So like the actual thing may not be things different, but when you look at it a different way, it actually looks different, right? And so I'm almost wondering, because of your lens that's unique from where you came from, when you go into a situation like if you don't come from a history of being like on the outside of like doors being closed, like if you don't come from that and you walk in, even though you may look like the people who have that history, your lens is like, I deserve to be here. We had presidents, we had like, right. So it's like automatically a frame of reference for you. So when you even your whole presence, if you walk into a room, you just say, like, you just come in exuding, I belong. Right. And I belong in the highest levels, and I belong in, like, you know, so I kind of feel like that's a part of it. I've really, this is someplace I've gotten to over the years. I'm 52 this year. And I've gotten to this place there where I've just been like, even for me, as someone who comes from like biracial and interfaith and all kinds of crazy mixed up stuff, right? If I see things differently, then I see things differently. So if my mindset changes, the thing in front of me actually does change, because it's how I see the thing. So like what you're talking about, it's like you walk in, it's like I see these different things happening, but I do think it's also just, it has a lot to do with you, Quentin. I'm saying as a person and how you already see things in the world, how your past filter, which is why it's so important to listen, to lean in, right? To kind of clear away the fray and lean in to say, okay, what's this person's lived experience? Because if I can get into the person's lived experience, then I can see why they see the things the way they do. I can even see why they ended up where they're at I'm not saying I can feel their pain. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I can now get a better view into their world and how they see things. And maybe I can adopt some of their thinking, right? To help me see things differently. I don't know. This is one thing that's it's been such a powerful mind shift for me as I've decided to change my mind. Like, here's an example. I went to college at UNLV, which is a mix. It's a state that doesn't have a lot of diversity, but then I go to law school in Boulder, Colorado, which is like its own island. Like it's a country. They call it the Republic of Boulder. It's its own country. And it doesn't, or at least that time, it didn't have a lot of diversity. I haven't really been around to really see what it's like now, but I doubt it's still a whole bunch. But back then when I was going, it was not. And when I first went on to I was like, oh, there's like nobody looks like me. Like no one's gonna really like no one's gonna, I'm not gonna be included here. Like I just automatically had this like sense about myself that I was like, ugh. But then, like, I don't know what it was. At some point, I just got sick of myself. Like I got sick of like kind of that victim way of thinking. And I see it in myself as I know what it looks like. And then I was like, well, you know what? I'm kind of like, what are you like? I'm good. Like I belong here. Like my confidence level increased. I purposely like changed the way I saw things. And then my relationships changed. And then like I felt like the world open up, but I had to see it differently.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, that's what makes me think of, because the way you describe that, I mean, I cannot imagine living in a place where everybody who's in power is black.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Exactly,
I just have to say, for whoever's listening, whether you're white or not, like, right, wouldn't that be kind of interesting? Like, could you ever imagine it? It's just like, wow. So it's a whole nother universe. I appreciate you bringing that forward. And I'm curious to know this whole journey for you leading, like, where did your journey starting to want to lead people, where did it start from? Where did it begin?
Man, that's a good question. Where did it begin? I don't know. I don't know if I could actually pinpoint where it began. I think I just had always a natural inclination just to serve. I've like, from a perspective of growing up, right? I always wanted to be like, hey, if there's a committee helping people, like helping do this, helping do that, I always just volunteered, right? And I think I just think I always had that inclination to serve. Like I was just talking to my wife this weekend, and we were talking about love languages, right? And one thing she said, your love language is you like to serve, to make people happy, right? And so, I never thought about it. Like, it's true. Like, so, yeah. So I don't know. I never looked at it as I wanted to be a leader, or a leadership was something that I wanted to inspire to be. And like just growing up and like seeing other leaders, or just even looking at the journey of some of the leaders here, the people we call leaders, right? Which to me is like a very fine few, right? It's like when you look at the NBA, right? There's stars and there's superstars. There's not a lot of superstars. To me, there's not a lot of leaders, because one of the traits I see with people who we consider leaders, or I consider leaders, is they never set out to be a leader. They set out for a purpose to either serve or, or to provide a vision for people, right? From that perspective. And so I never set up like, oh, I want to be a leader. I said, like, no, I want to serve. I want to make sure people get what they need. People, help people along whatever they want to do, right? From that aspect. And I would say through my career, sometimes it's been very rewarding, and sometimes, hey, I paid a penalty for it, right? Because not everybody sees it that way, right? From that perspective. And so so back to your question, I can't pinpoint it and saying like, oh, this is when I said I wanted to lead. I never really had that inclination. I don't even have that inclination today in saying that, oh, I want to be a leader. And remember, you and I had that whole debate on LinkedIn, right? To me, leadership is a behavior. It's not a title, right? People call, like, that's something that people call you because you exude a certain behavior. Not, you don't say, hey, I'm a leader today. And like people who say that, I'm like, that tells me you don't know what leadership is, right? And I always tell my team, just because you're in charge doesn't make you a leader, right? You can lead without having to be in charge, right?
Yes.
Or be the best player on the team, right? And I gave an example to one of my product leaders yesterday about, I don't know if people remember, I'm big on sports references, so I like sport. So people remember, like back in the 90s, the San Antonio Spurs, when they had David Robinson and Tim Duncan, right? Hall of Famers, right? But on those championship teams, they weren't the leader. The emotional and spiritual leader of that team was a little guy called Avery Johnson. He was their leader. He wasn't the best player. He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't a star, but he was the one that they got their energy from, and they followed whenever they went into battle. He's the one that called out the sets from defense and offense. He's the one would get into players' heads and motivate. He knew what buttons to push. And so to my point, you don't have to be in charge to be a leader. And that's why I always feel it's a behavior, right? And I see those behaviors all over the place where you see today kids are leaders, right? And people are, well, how can they be a leader? They're only 15 years old. It's not about a title or age, it's about the behavior they display.
Absolutely. To be honest, I think that I have 4 kids and I feel like every single one of them leads me more than I do them anyway. I'll tell anybody that. I absolutely think that's true. I've learned so much about, myself and the world through them. And I think that's also something leaders do. So I'm with you on that. I 100% agree. And I'm curious now, this is like the part of the podcast where I want the listeners to, they already can hear you have a high level of emotional intelligence, a lot of awareness, social and self-awareness. You care for people, and then you have this servant heart. But when was a time when maybe you didn't show up as a leader with heart? You didn't display as much care as you should have. Let the listeners, hear that story.
There's a number of those, but more one, I say what stuck with me, the more recent one is I had a product manager join my team from another team, right? And where I felt I go back in time, I wish I could change. I didn't show enough empathy and leadership in supporting her. And when she spoke to me, she said, hey, you know what? I'm coming from a not so good situation. I was promised certain things and so forth and everything. And I listened to what she said and so forth, but I could have been, and I just took it for granted that whatever needed to happen would happen, and it didn't, right? And if I were to go back in time, I would have made it a point to advocate for her more and lean in for her more to get what she deserved, right? And from my perspective. And so because of my lack of action there, the promotion that she was supposed to get, she didn't get at the time. And, it caused her, it was not just the money factor of it, but it was just a level of respect and acknowledgement that she was expecting that she didn't get, and which she did deserve, right, from that aspect. And so if I go back in time, I would say, hey, that was one of the times I didn't show up as a leader, the leader that she needed.
What happened after that? Was she still with you? Did she end up leaving at some point?
She's still with us. So,
okay.
After it didn't happen, we talked about it, and you know what? I apologized to her. I said, hey, you know what? I was wrong here. I didn't show up for you. And so, hey, I made it a point to show up for her. And no, I did get her the promotion on the next reward cycle and everything, right? But from that perspective, though, it's like I said, yeah, she lost on some money aspect of it, but money wasn't the thing that she was after, right? It was, hey, I worked hard. These were things that were promised to me, and then it was just the level of trust that she had in her leader at the time, and her leader didn't fight for her. And they did pass it on to me, and I just didn't lean in more. That I should have leaned in more and made sure that it happened.
Love that. There's so much richness there. What do you do now? Like, let's just say looking some years later, what do you do now to either recognize a similar situation and stop yourself from that behavior, or create a more positive behavior where you do feel like you're being more supportive? What do you do now? Is there some cadence or something that you do now, something different?
So what I do now, and like I'm reading this book, and he just helped me truly like put a lens on it, right? And so if you haven't had a chance, you should read this book. I read this book called Never Finished by David Goggins, right? It's an amazing personal story that he shares, right? But what I'm taking away from this book is some things I couldn't really put into words. And I would say, like, I practice these things. And so from a leadership perspective, I wouldn't even call it a leadership perspective. These are principles that I have as a person to show up as a leader, right? And so one of the things is self-discipline, right? You need to be the disciple of discipline, right? What it is that you want to do, and you got to stick to those, right? And so, he makes this comment: you don't stop the job because you're tired. You do the job until you're done. And so that's how I look at it. You do the job until you're done. right?
So true.
And then another principle he had was like, I really like is personal accountability, then there's humility, and then there's empathy. And so those are the things I feel like ground me, right? And so I always go back to that. It's like, hey, I got to do the job until it's done, right? No matter how hard it is, no matter if it hurts me or not, you got to do it till it's done. Not till you're tired or when it gets hard, you stop. You just got to have that self-discipline. And so I would say those four things kind of ground me in a sense. To your point, is like, hey, I want to make sure like whatever I do, these are the principles I go back to make sure I am doing the right thing.
And I like that for those who are listening. It's kind of like these the guiding principles of just being a human and just like showing up every day. If we establish those, and it's always like that whenever we're at a pivot point or whatever, and we look at that, it's like the North Star in our life. It'll help us stay more centered, and we can show up more consistently the way we intend versus like the accidental way or the not unprepared way and those kinds of things. It never turns out well, does it? Like I tell you, for me, if I'm in a high stress environment, like things get super duper nutty for me. That's obviously the hardest time for me to remain in control of like the emotional intelligence side of things. So I can be aware, I can be fully aware, but am I going to have emotional self-management? That's my trigger. That's my pivot point. The part that would be hard for me if I get really stressed or they're just super overextended. It's the emotional self-management side that says, are you regulating your emotions at meetings? Are you regulating your emotions to people, whether it's in your house or in your work or in your community, wherever it's at? And so questioning and stopping yourself. So always having these like things in place that go, oh, I'm feeling it. Like I'm feeling it like getting up to my neck, kind of, and I can't breathe. And oh boy. So you better walk away. You better like have, so I always like insert some kind of like self-care thing, something that's just centers on me, that calms me down, breathing, walking, whatever that might be, to get myself back on track so that I can be a better person for other people. Cause I think that's what always often happens. It's like, if we don't give ourselves the space or the time, we can't pause to reflect on how we are, how we feel. So then when we go in front of people, we had no time to prepare, and we can just, it's hard to be our best selves, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's like, this is where I feel like a lot of people struggle with emotions. Emotions is like, it's not bad, they're not wrong. But what you got to do, to your point, is you got to take a breath. You've got to recognize it, own it, name it, and move on. Right. And so you recognize it and say, okay, I'm angry. Why are you angry? Right. Find out the reason why you're angry, name it, and then you move on. I always tell people, like, anger is one of the most destructive emotions. And that's not saying that you shouldn't ever be angry. It's one of the emotions that you really need to recognize early, pause, identify it, name it, and move on.
I love that model. That's a great little model. Good steps, I think, for people who are listening right now to kind of take, if you have to lean on that side of anger taking over. Again, not having that emotional self-management. That's what we call it, like in the emotional intelligence space. Emotional self-management is a thing where you're able to regulate your emotions. The thing that Quentin's talking about right now, where you're able to recognize it and own it and name it and move on, and figure out what you're going to do with it. You know, what the heck are we going to do with it? So I think this is a critical conversation for sure. Okay, so now we are at the part of the podcast where you get to ask me, like we kind of turn the tables. You get to ask me whatever you want. What question might you have for me?
And so, yeah, I've been waiting to ask you this for a while, right? It's just like never had that. It's like, so I love that you talk a lot about active listening and so forth, right? Which is very kind of near and dear to my heart in the sense, because the products that I'm working on is what we call part of a listening program that customers would use, right? To get feedback from their employees and so forth, right? And like one of the things about our listening programs is like, yeah, listening and understanding and applying the right amount of sentiment and empathy to it is good, right? I would like to hear from you is like, okay, how do you work with companies and leaders, like have them acknowledge that they listen and drive action from it, right? The feel a lot of times we do have leaders that listen, right? But I feel where we fall down is like, okay, I heard you, but no action happens to it, not even from an acknowledgement standpoint, right? And I always say, when you listen to somebody, it's not always your job to fix their problem. Sometimes it's just acknowledgement, like, hey, you know what? I hear you, I understand you, I'm going to walk with you on this, right? From that aspect, or there is action that you can do it. So, like, how do you deal with the flip side of that coin?
Yeah, and have you read the book yet, Quentin? This last one?
I have not read the book yet. It's sitting on the desk right here.
Yeah, definitely read it, because that's going to answer. But here's what I'll say to you. I would argue that we have not listened if we have not in some way, shape, or form acted. And what I mean by that is, so there's, after you seek to understand, which is what you're talking about, the leaning in. When you say, I think someone's a good listener, you're saying like the person is like leaning in and they are taking the time to listen through surveys, through listening sessions, through ERGs, through culture teams, through any kind of means where they can gather feedback. You're saying they do a good job of that. I would argue that listening never takes place until we decode, act, and close the loop. And that's where you're going to see, you're going to discover my 5-part framework inside of that book. And so the decoding part is like, after we get all that survey feedback from your tools that you create for your customers, we need to take time as a group, maybe it's a cross-functional people, top and bottom of the organization, that get to review the feedback, look at it and put it into buckets of like, what are the 3 to 5 themes we're getting here? And I'm sure your survey tool helps with some of that, but it's handling it as a team to think through, okay, what are the real most important things here? So the decoding phase is when we reflect, when we research, when we interact with, we might have to process it and kind of break it down, what it is we've heard. And then that next step is action. But like, we can't go from like listening, seeking to like action without the decoding phase. Right. And then when we act, we don't have to act on everything, but we need to be strategic about action. Action, what I mean by action, I don't mean that we actually even do anything after we've leaned in to listen to someone. We leaned in and to seek to understand what they're meaning. So we have a conversation, interaction, and it might just be, like you said, Quentin, all they want to know is that you leaned in, you were present for them in the moment. You leaned in with empathy to understand their situation. And that in their minds could be the compassionate action they were looking for. But you need to qualify that. You have to ask the person on the other end, is there something that you need from me? Is there a way I can help? Or they may say no in the beginning of the conversation. At the end, you see that you probably could help them. And you could say, would you mind if I go do this? Ask permission to help. And then the last step is closing the loop. And that closing the loop is going back and saying, you said this and you wanted us to do this. And we did some research and we found that out. And here's what we think we're going to do. And so what do you think about that? Okay, great. So I'm going to go do that now, and I'm going to come back to you and within a few months to see how that goes or report back to you. And I'm going to continue that cycle of closing the loop on what you said to me, what we did about it, so that you understand that we did in fact hear you. So that framework is the thing that solidifies for people that they have in fact been heard.
Yeah,
that's the framework.
Yes. Okay. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. So I can't wait till you get it. You get me deep in that. Yes. Can you read it on a plane or read on vacation? You literally, you can read it fast because it's actually much shorter than the last book. So.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that was like one aspect of that's what I am. I would say struggling with, but that's the challenge that I'm having with conversations with customers, right? Because I feel there's different ways to listen. There's the proactive, reactive way, indirect, direct, wherever you want to talk with it from that perspective. But to your point, I like the phrase you said, listening doesn't end until there's some action, right? And so synthesize of that feedback and action that has been taken. I think that was missing from this whole equation when I talk to other leaders, right? It's like, I feel employees, they say what they give a lot of feedback, both indirect and direct. I feel we just don't do it. We don't do enough with it, right? Or do anything with it. Like, oh yeah, I know how they're feeling. Okay, what are you doing about it?
Exactly. And that's what I love. That's the reason why I created my consulting firm, Employee Fanatics, because the whole purpose of it was to help organizations listen more effectively using the data they probably already have through like the tools that you provide, for example, or other types of survey platforms, listening sessions and employee resource groups and culture teams they may or may not have created, but we help them create kind of a sense of always gathering and seeking and always in a cycle of action and reflection. And when we get that, that's how we create the culture of listening that I always talk about. So that's the work we do. We literally, that's the main focus, is to help organizations listen. So I would, for example, we partner with you with your customers who are like, what do we do next? Or like our employees, the data looks the same as it did last year. And what we do is we go in and we help them synthesize, we go in and help them action plan and reflect on it. We help them create the branded culture teams and the ERGs and all of those things. So then at the end, the employees and or those they serve outside, the customers, finally feel heard and understood and like they're valued for being there and that their voice means something. So this is some good stuff. It's very, very powerful. I'm so glad you do the work. I didn't even realize you did that tool. So we need to talk some more.
Yes. I have next month I will be releasing 2 new tools into but it's a shameless plug, 2 new tools from our Microsoft Viva. So I know a lot of your listeners may be familiar with Glint. So Glint is now going to be for part of Microsoft Viva. So that's for org level surveys, to what you're talking about.
Yep.
And then we're also releasing another product called Viva Pulse, right?
Yes.
Which is complementary to Glint. So think of the org level surveys is usually every 6 months, right? And it's usually run by HR. Yeah. Viva Pulse, we purposely designed for managers and leaders to give more frequent feedback at the local level.
Yes. I love it. I love it. That's exactly, we need more and more listening. That is what do you think? It's like, people are like, why did you do that book? It's like, listening is the crux of all the other things. Everything else you want from your customers or your employees, you get it by listening. I promise you, if you do, and that's why I outlined the framework for doing it. Because I think, and that framework started with the organizational listening. And then it has just gone and been used in the one-on-one and the team space too. So yeah, it's really, it's a good one. Okay, so for those who are listening right now, what might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with as they are thinking about their leadership journey, their human journey? What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave them with?
I'd say pearls of wisdom is always lead with empathy. Always assume good intentions. And I'd say last but not least, you can't have a cookie cutter approach to how you deal with people, right? You have to lean in and understand, their journey as well. Why they're here, what they do, because people work for different reasons, right? People got here in a whole different set of manners and so forth. And I feel sometimes too often, right, we fall into like, well, I'm a leader, I'm busy. No, you're not too busy. If you're saying people are your number one resource, then you need to understand the people that you work with, right? And I promise you, the more you understand them, the better you can lead them.
That was powerful. Did you all hear that? Let that soak in. The more you understand your people, the better you can serve them. And I love that. That's where we started, right? We started with this concept of serving and servant leadership. And I think that's what leadership with the heart is about, what caring leadership is about. It boils down to, how do I serve the person in front of me at the moment, which is why leadership is not about a title. It can be anybody looking to you for guidance, needing your support in the moment. And I ask people often when I'm speaking to audiences, who here thinks of themselves as a leader? And only like maybe 50% of the room raise their hand. And I make them do an exercise where they actually, I make them recognize in themselves that they all have leadership in them, despite their title. And that is because in every sense of the word and in every minute of the day, someone is looking to us. Someone is watching us. Someone needs us. Someone's requesting something of us. And we have a choice. We can show up in a way that supports them and serves them, or we can serve ourselves. That's the gist. So I appreciate you, Quentin, being like a perfect example of what the servant leadership philosophy is, serving people in the moment for what they need. And it's been a great pleasure. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much for the time. Really, really appreciate it. It was great having this conversation with you. Super, super, super powerful.
And for those listening, thanks so much for joining the Leadership with Heart podcast. Don't forget to share this far and wide. I appreciate you. Be well.